The anticipation is building here as we expect Ken Ofori-Atta, the Finance Minister, to speak to Parliament today, seeking to review the year's budget and how our performance has been against the targets set in November last year. We still have 6 months to go in 2018. There's a lot of expectation. We're going to do the analysis of it right here. We'll be hearing more from Roland and Mamavi, who are stationed at Parliament House. But before we go to them, Norvan joins us from the Joy business team, and boy, has he been crunching the numbers. You even look a little stronger from the crunching. How are you doing this morning?
I'm fine, thank you.
It's great to have you.
Good.
And of course, I can't wait to start delving into the realities of what Ken Ofori-Atta is going to have to present to Parliament later today. But first, let's talk about what we know. We know that there is not going to be an increase of VAT to 21.5%. Who sent us on this wild goose chase to begin with?
Well, Kojo, let me say that when it comes to the VAT thing, I'm sure that somebody or some people were just interested in seeing that, okay, what is it that we can do to make up for the revenue shortfalls? Remember, the IMF, when they came in their own staff report, indicated that, yes, the government has, come up with some measures to see how they can make up for the shortfalls. You can't spend so much when you can't raise in so much. I mean, you must always match your expenditure against your revenue. The best thing is to make sure, like when you start a business, they say break even and then you can breathe, come above the water, but do not be put under the water. And so one of the things that we knew or we had heard or we had picked up was a consideration for, some increment in VAT. Remember that the NHIS, which is part of the VAT calculations, or where, they draw their funding, also have been crying for some increment over time. I mean, I think this has been over 5 years. I mean, the last parliament, looked at all the numbers they recommended. They said, look, let's go up. And then you saw that, there were some discussions. They left it. This new parliament came in. And now you understand, we all know that the NHIS boss has been going around. He's been meeting with various groups, including Labour, to try and let them understand that, look, we just need to accept this. But that is part of VAT. How do we do this? Do we have to add up whatever increment we are looking for, maybe 1%, 1.5%, even if it's 0.5? Do you add it up, or you look at the calculations within the VAT basket in terms of how the revenue is shared, national communication tax and all those other things, and then you have to give out something from either of them.
While keeping VAT at
while keeping it at the 17.5% that we have. And I mean, initially some of us heard that when the information got to the old man or the president, he said increasing VAT is a no-no. And there are reasons. Political gains is one of them. And then also the fact that people still are saying the economy, things are very hard, we need to take our time. And you don't come in November reading 2018 budget, abolish certain taxes, and then all of a sudden you spring a surprise on the people. And so all these things play out. And I think that when the presentation was done to the cabinet, in the last cabinet meeting, the emergency one that was held on Tuesday night, they sort of said, look, you know what, we don't have to increase VAT. And I'm sure if I was the old man and I was sitting there, I'll look into the face of the finance minister with the vice president and the economic management and say, guys, you know what, go back and bring me a different plan. This is a no-no. And I think that is what he did, to say you can't do it. And it could also come at the backdrop of the pressure that was mounting when this was put out there. People started, no, it's just not possible. We can't accept this. And so, they had to just backtrack on it.
But there are going to be new taxes, aren't there? There are going to be increases as well.
Obviously, Kojo. I mean, if we're not doing VAT, what do we do? Where can we raise the revenue? We are hearing there could be some increment at the SNIT side. So you and I, our contributions, And I remember yesterday in the Joy Business newsroom, the debate was, okay, let's look at the components as far as net contribution is concerned. You have the employer contributing some percentage, and then you, the employee, also doing some percentage. Where would they amend the law and ask for the increment to be effected? Is it coming from you and I, or is it going to come from the employer?
Let's reach a little bit into the future. Let's do a bit of speculation. Some sources are revealing to us that there are likely to be some sin taxes introduced. You know, taxes on things that people consider to be detrimental to health, like alcohol, tobacco. Sugar has even come up at some point.
Sure.
Looking into the crystal ball, do you reckon there might be some particular things that government might be looking at, touching, in terms of introducing sin taxes?
Yes, you look at it, and one of the things that readily comes up is plastic. We know the waste issues in this country, and so there have been some economists who have even recommended that let's look at that area, and so maybe they could go into that area as well. Tobacco, yes, they could see if they would want to kind of put
not a
those
lot of
ones
people smoke, though. Do you think that would be an impactful sin tax?
Well, they need money, and wherever they think that they could, lay their hands on, why not? They would try and then do those things. I mean, I remember I talked to one economist who even said that let's look at the DVLA side. I mean, let's go in there and let's see if we can increase taxes in that area as well. So there have been a lot of, recommendations, and I'm sure they are looking at it critically, and they would come back to us with hoping to raise this money. Remember, in their quest to raise revenue, they look at where can we increase, and we don't have to suffer so much in doing the collections. If they did VAT, it's a consumer tax. You understand? And so that was going to be very simple and easy for them. If you're doing DVLA, we know all the sort of things that happens. That's also another area that will be easy for them. But tobacco, just as you said, how many people smoke anyway? I mean, if you look at the population, so how much can we even raise from there? I mean, you're talking of over 1.8 billion. That is the kind of shortfall, the gap you want to fill. Can we raise these monies? And if you recall, it's not just the next 6 months, the next 3 years. Can we raise enough revenues? And we also pick up that some of the things, if you look at the fiscals, they may want to introduce things that would not, impact on the fiscals. So which means that if we want to do some projects, how do we do it? How do we ensure that we ring fence and these things do not have to come and impact? Because the moment you throw in a lot of things on the fiscals, there is going to be a problem.
Now, in a moment, I would like us to move away from the revenue mobilization and perhaps talk a little bit about the macroeconomics. But first, why don't we have a quick look at some of the figures from the 2018 budget, which was presented in November last year. I believe we have some visuals to go with some of the major highlights from last year's budget, which is about to be reviewed. Several things came up, including these. The targets was to stabilize the economy, set it on a path of sustained, diversified and resilient growth. Very, very difficult targets to achieve in our economy. Optimizing the key sources of growth in the economy on a sustainable basis, of course, and enhancing a competitive and enabling business environment for private sector-led growth. This is something that really we have to question how far the government has gone in achieving that. We know that over the past 5 months, the growth of the private sector has actually been on the decline, hitting its all-time lowest in the past 5 months, just this month. So we don't know about private sector-led growth per se and how well they are doing in that area. But one thing that has most certainly been on everybody's mind is the cedi. The currency's performance this year, I don't think this is what they expected. Last year, the entire depreciation was something like 5.6% for the whole year. This year, we've already seen Sorry, it was 4.6% last year. This year, as of June, we've already seen 5.6%. Okay, we've already beaten the entirety of last year, this year. It's scary. What is accounting for it? How much of it is down to us and perhaps our failures as a nation to manage our currency? And how much of it is external factors that we simply cannot control?
Kojo, I think that over the period, we've hammered on this point, and government upon government will have to find a way of resolving it. If you have an import-led economy, you don't expect your currency to be that strong. I mean, that's the basics, and until we cover that, and that's why some of us were really happy when we're hearing one district, one factory, and all those kind of initiatives which was supposed to spark industrial growth for us as a country. And we thought that that would have been better for all of us if we're able to do it. Today, here we find ourselves, how many of those factories have started? One of them was inaugurated. We don't know what the state is as of now. And I think that the government needs to really begin to do these things. And also, if you have a lot of multinational companies working in your country, at the end of the financial year, when they declare dividends, what do? They repatriate these monies back to their shareholders who are outside. And if you look at the cycle, you realize that in the first quarter ending, getting into the second quarter, these auditing, all those things would have been done, and then they would have gone for their AGMs, and then they begin to declare their dividends, and they have to repatriate these funding. And that's how come MTN, the Bank of Ghana had to come in and say, look, you know what, you need to stagger the payments of the dividends that you want to repatriate. You can't just move all of it, because what happens, they have to look for dollars and then repatriate to those their people as they should it should be. And even at the time when MTN is not only declaring dividends, but is also undergoing an IPO process, and so it means that those foreigners are giving away their shares, and it's supposed to be sold on the Ghanaian market. These monies would have to be changed into dollars and then sent back. And so all of these things play a role in impacting on the cedi. Also around this time of the year, you have importers thinking about, okay, in December, what are the things we have to sell? And so they start, ordering for these products. And when they are ordering for them, what happens? They need dollars to be able to do that. And so these are the things that are happening to us, and we ought to be able to look at it critically and as a nation ensure that we find a way of dealing with it. And that's how come, some people have said that, or some analysts have said, let's ensure that these multinationals, when they come into our country, they list on our stock exchanges, let Ghanaians also own part of the business, then we cut down on the level of money that needs to leave almost every year within particular times. Sure, we've seen the cedi now trying to find its feet a bit. It's around 4.7 as of yesterday. I don't know how much it's trading this morning. But you see that when we hit September, thereabout, you see some depreciation again, because a lot of these importers are bringing in things, and then it will then find its feet again. So they need to find a way of dealing with these issues. And the dollar is also sometimes hard to find, all the sort of things that happen when these companies are looking for the money. The banks themselves, whether they have enough, is the Bank of Ghana itself releasing even enough to the market to ensure that people can have access and all that.
Indeed. And of course, we talked about external factors. The dollar itself is getting stronger. The US has increased their interest rates as well. All of these things tend to, create a certain effect on the scarcity of the dollar, exactly, which obviously affects us. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. Let's look at some of the other medium-term development policy framework, macroeconomic targets that we heard about in the 2018 budget. So they expected the real GDP to grow at an average rate of 6.2% between now and 2020. Okay, they're also expecting inflation to stay within the target band of about 8.2%. Overall fiscal deficit to remain within the fiscal rule of 3 to 5%. All sound achievable, except for the fact that this half year, 2018, we've been dancing around some of these targets in a way that makes you wonder whether government has what it takes to keep things on an even keel.
Yes, Kojo, if you look at inflation, I think that somewhere last month or last 2 months. It was actually for the half year, they were looking at hitting some 9.8. That's the half year medium-term target for inflation. And they were able to do it. But in the last report that came from the Ghana Statistical Service, it inched up by some 0.2, which then went to 10%. So you would say, well, we don't know, but maybe they will try. By the time we get to the end of the year, we want to see if they can meet the 8.2 plus or minus 2 targets that they are looking at. There are things that are happening when it comes to GDP. I do not know, but I must say that they are trying their best. You see, you're trying your best to do a lot of things, but even in your quest to ensure that when it comes to policy rate, you set the rate at which banks get their funding from Bank of Ghana, for which they would then use that to also price, so that when you and I go for a loan from them, we'll be able to get a better deal for ourselves, with all the plus and minus, with the risk things that they will slap on it, for us. And so they seem to be doing well in their quest to manage the economy, but they just need to look at certain areas and ensure that things don't go haywire as far as managing and meeting their targets that they've set for themselves.
Novan, let's break this down to that simple, basic conversation that makes sense to every Ghanaian. We're about to hear the finance minister talk about how our economy is performing. We're about to hear him talk about how we are yet to meet our deficit targets, how we need to raise revenue in order to meet these targets, not just for this year, but for the coming years as well. We're about to hear the finance minister talk about a need for more taxes. We're about to hear explanations of why we are not feeling things in our pockets. But ultimately, if you look at all the things that we have not done well in, like revenue mobilization, widening the tax net, getting more people to pay tax rather than taxing fewer people more. When you look at all these things, is it not fair to assume that the reason why we are not doing well against these targets, or as well as we want against these targets, is because the basic things that the government themselves said they would do, like setting up this national identification system, digital addressing, all these things that will help them to get more people to pay the existing taxes without introducing new ones. All these things have delayed. You talked about one district, one factory. These things that are supposed to create jobs, spark the economy, reduce imports. All these things have delayed. Is it not this delay, this failure to launch, which really explains why people are not feeling the economy in our pockets today?
Well, Kujo, let me start it from this point. Taken from the revenue expenditure. What is budget? Budget basically looks at, okay, I have 10 cedis, 10 Ghana cedis in my pocket, and I need to spend the 10 cedis. What are my priorities in terms of the things that I need to spend on? I probably may have a list of needs, but how do I ensure that this 10 cedis that I have goes across, touches every bit of the things I'm looking for, and at the end of the day, I am comfortable? That is what it is. So it's revenue against expenditure. And when we talk of expenditure for government, what is it? The ability to fix those roads, the ability to give you good schools, good hospitals, like we've been crying over the Legon Hospital, no bed syndrome, and all those kind of things. That is government's expenditure. So government will tax you and I, and then use these monies to do these things for us. So it's basically our money that they will take and use to make sure that life is easy for you and I. You get me? So that I don't have to wake up very early because I know my road is not good, and then take my time, get off that until I get on the highway, and then get to the office. You get it? If the road is very good, I could spend some more 30 minutes, in sleeping. But it's our monies that are supposed to be used in doing this. Now let's get into this. So government sets up and say, okay, these are the things that we want to do in the year 2018, and we need so much to be able to do them. And then they look at what they have to do. But I agree with you, because if the National Identification Authority had rolled out as at the time according to their timetable, I'm sure that by now would have gotten somewhere. The digital address system, you want to look at all other things that they are supposed to do, if they have been able to do them. And one critical thing that, is a problem, property tax, our ability to do these collections till today. I mean, people would have the debate as to the figures or the charges in terms of that tax not being adequate, whilst others will also say, collection-wise, we don't even have a plan in going about it. And I think that for many years, we've been talking about property tax, let's ensure that we go in there, empower the district assemblies. I mean, this NAPCO thing you want to do, you should be able to have a whole team of people who will be trained to understand. First, you should be able to know how many buildings are within a district. What are the categorizations of buildings? And then you should, because you can't just tax everybody en bloc.
Exactly.
I mean, if I have, let's say, a 10-story, you can't charge me the same as the 2-bedroom house that I have at my corner. So you should be able to, look at the categorization, put the taxes and everything in place, and then roll out and make sure that we begin the collection. Our challenge, Kojo, has been collection, our ability to collect, and the processes, empowering people to ensure that they do the collection wise. I mean, trust me, the GRE does a lot of collections. I mean, and a lot of the time, even rebates that they are supposed to give people is a problem, because if they do all that, you get to know that some of the declarations that we have, exceeded our target and all that, it won't happen.
Our expectation this morning is that we're going to hear an explanation from the finance minister of how, indeed, what they have done so far has made a difference. We will hear the figure $5 billion. We'll hear how they have put $5 billion back in our pockets thanks to the implementation of policies that they have done so far. Mama V is standing by now with Dr. Lord Mensah. He's a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. In a moment, we will be joining Mama V. But before then, let's talk about this. Novan, this $5 billion figure, we're told from sources that we'll hear the finance minister give the example of an average Ghanaian family, a 5-member family, and how some of the things they have done so far has improved the life of the typical Ghanaian family. They'll talk about the reduction in electricity tariffs.
Yes.
They'll talk about the free SHS. So they will tell you about one of the firstborn of this family who perhaps may have completed university, immediately going to be employed by what's it called?
NABCO.
NAB, yes. They will talk about the youngest who perhaps is about to write BEC, who doesn't have to worry about a registration fee. They will give examples of some of these things and how they have impacted on the pockets of such a Ghanaian family over the period of a year. But if you put that against the undoubted need for new taxes and increases in existing taxes, how will this balance out ultimately?
I was clearly going to ask you a simple question is, what would it be of benefit? Of what benefit would it be to me when I save 5 cedis, and out of the 5 cedis, I still have to put, let's say, about 4 cedis back into paying tax? If you tell me that I don't have to pay school fees, I don't have to pay BEC, whatever, I don't have to do A, B, C, D, but it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul. So government says don't pay fees, but now they'll increase my SNIT contribution. So they are just taking the money back. That's how this whole thing is going to be. So they have to be able to find better ways of ensuring that if you say you are leaving money in my pocket, when I get my paycheck and I look at my expenditure, again, I should be able to say, okay, yes, I've gotten good money. But if my paycheck is also going to reduce, because mind you, if the SNIT contribution increase, supposed, let me put it, or alleged to be increased, is done. It means that if it's supposed to hit my side of it, then I'm going to lose money. Even if it hits the employer, employers begins to contemplate, do we downsize? What do we do? Because then he needs to pay more, and then he'll be looking at which areas can he cut to ensure that, they have enough money to even pay the staff that they have. So all these dynamics come to play in this whole scheme of saying, you know what, we've been able to save the average family a lot of money, but the average family still gets their paycheck and a lot of it going to the other side of it, which is not really good.
Let's remind ourselves of a few more of the targets that were set in the 2018 budget that Ken Ofori-Atta read to Parliament in November last year. First of all, we can look at some of the macroeconomic targets that were set. Overall GDP growth rate of 6.8% is what we were told. We're looking at non-oil GDP growth rate, 5.4% was the target. And for the end of 2018, we're looking at an inflation rate of 8.9% with an average inflation rate of 9.8%. So again, looking at how 2017 went, these seemed like pretty feasible targets. But halfway down the road, how are we doing against them, Novan?
Halfway down the road, I did indicate to you. Now inflation is around 10%. You have GDP, which is also doing well. We're hoping that if by end of year, they will be able to come back to the 8.9 as set by themselves. My Bank of Ghana targets is 8 plus or minus 2. That is the target coming from Bank of Ghana. And I think it falls within what we see the government itself setting for. If you look at the targets, they are trying. They are trying to see what they can do to be able to hold on, to their own targets. As of today, we still haven't gotten the June figures yet. We are still hoping that maybe when the finance minister gets to Parliament, that is where he would, release these figures to us for us to see what the performance has been with all the, targets that they set for themselves. So we will hope to see what that will mean. But if you look at the May figures that we saw, you see that yes, they were within range. They were doing well. And when you talk to some of them, said, "Don't worry, wait until the finance minister comes to Parliament, and then you see how we have fared." But they are doing well. Let's see what will happen.
Now, one thing that really can shock a budget are surprise expenditures, things you didn't account for, which suddenly become national issues, and you have to find money to solve them. Galamsey was an example last year. This year, the health sector has drawn a lot of attention. We've talked about no beds, these closed down facilities and so forth. Suddenly, health and emergency healthcare has become a big issue. How much of a shock has that been to our budget, and how do you expect that to affect our performance in the coming 6 months?
I think that, just as you've said, because we don't expect these things, but when you draw a budget, you definitely have contingency plan in place. So you should have some funds standing by to be able to cater for these surprises that are thrown at you when they come. And I think that they themselves as a government did indicate that there's a lot of work to be done as far as the health sector is concerned. Agric, we have issues there as well. Education, there are issues there as well. Everybody is asking for some kind of funding, to be able to take care of the things that are happening in the sectors as it should be. So I think that it could be one of the, especially with the health sector, one of the reasons why we're hearing something like a health tax. A health tax, I mean, we don't know how that and where and how we're going to be paying those kind of taxes if that is introduced. And so these things are shocking, but I mean, I'm sure that they will find ways of ensuring that they take care of these things, because if you don't, they throw your budget off gear, and that won't be good, which means that your expenditures will run through the roof and your deficit will be huge, staring at your face.
Now, last year we did hear about some tax measures that were going to be considered this year. You talked about property rates.
Yes.
In 2018's budget, Ken Ofori-Atta said they were seeking to improve the collections. They also said they wanted to extend the requirements to produce tax clearance certificates for these large private sector contracts. They talked about implementing the excise tax stamp policy. They talked about reviewing suspense regimes. How well have they done? How well has the GRA under the Finance Ministry done against some of these proposed targets?
Well, if you look at the GRA, at least the excise tax stamp, we've seen it introduced. Yeah. I mean, we saw the back and forth with the manufacturing companies, yes, and some of these importers who were really not happy with the implementation of that. And so, at least we've seen that there have been some middle ground, and that implementation is going on. If you look at the extension of the requirement when it comes to tax clearance certificates, they're doing something about all those ones. But one of the areas which I would say as of today, they have not done much is the property rate or the property tax, if you want to look at it. I mean, I would say this is long overdue. This is something that will give you revenue. Why are you finding it difficult? I mean, in Accra, walk through East Legon and look at the kind of buildings that are there. Why should they be paying 100 cedis as a yearly property rate? 100 Ghana cedis. Come on. Why is the government sitting there? What are they doing about this? Or even the district assemblies that these areas find themselves. You understand? I mean, you have buildings that are being rented out in dollars in some areas, even in Accra itself. And why we find it difficult to, look at the property rate and ensure that we collect what is due government, what would be used in, doing the kind of work that we are looking for, infrastructural development for us as a nation. And so they need to quickly come up with a plan. They should be able to tell us in this budget. I mean, I'm expecting the finance minister to say, okay, we said we're going to do something about this. Okay, it's for 6 months, we've not been able to do anything because this is the plan that we had. And so when it comes to property rate going forward, this is the plan, and we're going to ensure that we collect these things. So I think it's one of the areas that must be looked at critically, and they have to be able to do something about it.
Earlier this year, the Auditor General released a report into an audit that they were commissioned to do by the Vice President into contracts, and various ministries and sectors were named in this report for massive waste running into over 5 billion. Yeah. Now, let's look at the impact of waste, corruption, and poor governance on our budget, and whether or not this government has made any inroads into closing that gap. This report identified 5 billion, and that was just on contracts. You can well imagine there are many other sources of waste. How do you assess government's ability to close these loopholes and gaps?
If I look at that, I would say that this particular Auditor General seemed to be, will I say, roller coaster? Some kind of, I mean, bulldozer. This is a man who wants to close all those gaps. Because over the years, I'm sure that the kind of audit work that was going on, if we saw these things, we seem not to be very interested in even in their collection. I mean, Public Accounts Committee will sit, will hear very interesting things, and we're not doing anything about it. But I see a man, Dom Level, who says, look, you know what? We would not only even sometimes surcharge you, but we would ensure you pay back what you've taken with interest if you have to prosecute you well. And so I think that the government should continue to give him that support. The special audit that is going on, even in the payroll, payroll sector and all that. And I remember when I heard one of the unions talk about the fact that, look, they've been doing this over the years, they should come back. Well, this time, it is the Auditor General himself. It's not a consultant who is doing it. It's our own Auditor General who feels that let's begin to look at it. I mean, when he disclosed that a company has over 100 contract staff, most of which are people who have retired, then I was like, whoa. And we say there's no jobs in this country. You've gone on retirement and you're still sitting there. Is it that we don't have anybody with the kind of experience you have? Then it means that we are not even training people. It means we're not training people. So it means that these people get to these positions, they refuse to impact, they refuse to train. And so when they leave, we have to go and beg them to come back. And remember, we are under an IMF program, which only gives you the room to replace but not to employ new people. So what you do is that as far as the public service and civil service is concerned, when somebody, exits, then you replace the person. But if these people are all sitting there, how do we replace?
Who gets replaced?
Who gets the job? You understand? So for me, I am for the Auditor General's, drive to ensure that a lot of these gaps are closed. And this time you also have the special prosecutor also looking into a lot of this. They say, look, my guy, when you get it, even before you finish your audit, you just give it to me. Let me also do my investigation, and then we'll begin. And I think that this will help in closing a lot of the waste that we see in our system. I mean, I remember of a story that I was told of the fact that in Africa, when these Bretton Woods institutions are coming, there's a way they when they come, we sign a contract easily, but when they go to Asia, they have it tough in signing those contracts.
Indeed. And there's so much more to discuss.